Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Jay Rivenbark. We're looking at a passage from Psalm 48, verses 1 through 8. I want to talk to you about a new city today. Earlier in the week, I talked about the Zion tradition. So many of the Psalms point to a theology that is known as the Zion tradition. So this teaching or tradition comes from the fact that certain Psalms contain keywords which reference the city of Jerusalem or the city of Zion or some other synonym for Zion. As I mentioned on Monday, 75 out of 150 Psalms references Zion or the Zion tradition. When you look at all of these Psalms as a whole, when you examine them as a whole, a theme develops concerning God's plan for Zion. This theology is also developed within our other sections of the Old Testament, especially the prophets. If you look after Solomon's temple was built, the pilgrimage design became a vital part of Israel's religious practices. The Old Testament glorified Zion as the navel of the earth, Ezekiel 5:5 and 38:12, or the throne of Yahweh, Jeremiah 3:17, Psalm 84:3. And the world mountains symbolizing God's supremacy over all nations. So there are some key factors about this tradition. One, this Zion tradition, we can understand it's the house of God. It's the dwelling place of God's presence. The nations will flow into the city in search of God's teaching. The Zion tradition often refers to pilgrimages that are made to the sanctuary in order to keep festivals. So when God dwells in Zion, he is pictured as causing all wars to cease and judging all nations righteously. Therefore, God's reign in Zion equates to international peace worldwide. Psalm 48 points to this tradition. The concepts of God's city, God's mountain, and the city of Jerusalem are seen as in this psalm too. And what we have to understand is that the promises of Zion will be fulfilled or are fulfilled in the New Jerusalem. So when we read about how God protects and preserves Jerusalem forever in verse 8, we understand that what God promised over Israel and earthly Jerusalem will be completely fulfilled in the last days through the New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem is a name given to heaven. So often when we talk about heaven, that's what we mean. So elements of the Zion tradition in the New Jerusalem are things like Zion. The New Jerusalem is a city where God lives, Revelation 21, 2 verses 2 through 7. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. Like Zion, God lives in the city of New Jerusalem with his people. Revelation 21:3 says, I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. Like Zion, the New Jerusalem was associated with a high mountain, a symbol of victory and dominance over other cities. It says in 21:10, John was taken to a mountain to see the city. And it says, so he took me in the spirit to a great high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Like Zion, the kings of the earth and all nations will enter it and honor God. Verses 24 through 27 of chapter 21 says, the nations will walk in its light, and the kings of the world will enter the city in all their glory. Its gates will never be closed at the end of the day, because there is no night there. And all the nations will bring their glory and honor into the city. Nothing evil will be allowed to enter, nor anyone who practices shameful idolatry and dishonesty, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Like Zion, the blessings of New Jerusalem are only for chosen people, those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So, Jay, let's take a look at this. God's promises with Abraham, David, and Israel are ultimately fulfilled in the New Jerusalem. So how does that change the way we read Old Testament passages like Psalm 48 when we understand that?
Well, it gives us a clearer picture of what the future will look like. All of these Old Testament writings were describing a concept, but it's also describing a reality that's yet to come for us. But knowing and having some of these descriptions as a believer should motivate us, should encourage us, should give us peace, hope, joy, because the reality is that our future residence where we will live is so much better than anything we've ever experienced or ever could experience here on this earth in this life. I mean, it's the city of God, New Jerusalem, whatever title you want to give reference to, is not just where God is from, it's where he will live. And live there with us, that we get to be citizens. I don't even think we have the capacity really to process the thoughts that God will live there. We will live there. And all of the peace and the lack of sin and all things that make this life a struggle, pain, sorrow, loss, old age, struggle financially, poverty, all those things will be gone forever and ever and ever and ever. And to think that that is a literal place that we will be and to experience should cause us at times with the things that we deal with say, you know what, it might be tough right now. I wish I weren't going through this, but I am. But you know what, this is temporary, and I've got so much more to look forward to.
When it's finally fulfilled.
When it finally comes to pass.
Yes, finally is fulfilled in our life. A lot of times, people only think this is where my loved ones go. They've gone to heaven. They died and gone to heaven. I used to use that terminology when I did funerals. I avoid it.
What do you say now?
They've gone to be with the Lord.
Okay.
Because my understanding of Scripture is at death, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That's the one thing I can confirm. It seems to me that the fulfillment of all of the other things is still to come.
Yeah, I agree in the sense of, as it relates to, quote, New Jerusalem, this city that will ultimately descend out of what we know.
Gates of pearl, streets of gold,
that
all
we
of those
ultimately,
things.
we think of heaven, descends and gets placed on a brand new earth, a completely transformed back to its original perfection state to live. And so, I understand what you're saying. I would probably refer to that as temporary heaven, not eternal heaven.
Yeah, I just avoid that word because I'm not sure. People, they're walking on streets of gold today. Yeah, maybe not.
I get it. You're right. The one thing we do know unequivocally is they're in the presence of the Lord, and
nothing else matters.
And that's enough.
Right. Would anything else matter? That's exactly right.
Then there are other multiple places where we do get some significant descriptions of New Jerusalem,
right,
and all of what it looks like, even the dimensions of it, and the list goes on and on. But the other
I cannot think of the dimensions without thinking of the old song "Hallelujah Square." There was and I remember a guy singing that song, and he was a good singer. But he told this story, and I'm always skeptical, and I was a kid then and was still skeptical of it. And looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, that
probably not.
He told about this new microscope the government had come up with, and they had spotted this square out in space that they couldn't quite, and he goes, he weaves this elaborate story, and I was like, yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, you probably could have got away with that 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, well, this would have probably been 50 years ago at this point. And this person, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Now that I think about it, I think you do. And he probably wouldn't do that today. He was a young man then.
Yeah.
But what it on the heels of that though. What does the New Jerusalem mean to you?
I think it means the culmination of getting to, when I say place, meaning where God will dwell forever as a community, that we will for the first time, but also forever, experience life the way God intended for us to do it from the very beginning, before the fall of man, before sin.
Naked? That was a curveball.
Yeah, in the sense of transparency, yes. There are a lot of references to clothed in righteousness, whatever. And for some people, and I've heard preachers say, some people are going to be dressed very scantily.
Ain't got much righteousness.
They didn't have much good works to show much righteousness.
That's funny.
I'm not sure I adhere to that philosophy, but ultimately, for me, it's hope. It's the blessed hope. I think it was Paul that talked about we grieve for loss and pain and suffering, but not like people who don't have hope. And ultimately, that is hope.
Yeah, you used the word culmination. The word that was in my mind is finality. Like it is everything is resolved. Everything that is undone is resolved. There is, I think if we sat down and made a list, there are millions and millions of things in this world that are unresolved, whether it's sicknesses or relationship issues or addictions or frustrations or things that just seem to be out of order. Everything is resolved. And it's like you get to and I'm scared to use this reference because unless you have some you could do it in a movie as well. Same, I was thinking of a music experience, but in music or in a movie, they keep this tension. It's intentional, right? Because without it,
they lose you.
You're going to check out. But in the end, it's all resolved, right? I hate to watch a movie that's not resolved.
Yeah.
Right.
You're like, seriously?
Yeah.
That's it?
Y'all going
they left you hanging.
Right. This is how it's going to end. Or I got to wait 14 years for them to come out with the next one. As a matter of fact, Barbara and I recently watched a series, and I think sometime during season 2, they decided that was going to be the end. Well, I'm sure it had to play all the storylines out. It would have taken a lot longer. But in the last episode, you saw this quick wrap up of they tried to resolve every character and every situation. And it felt unusual, because you knew but that's how I see the New Jerusalem. There is this final wrap up of every character, every tension, every frustration. It all gets resolved once and for all.
Yeah, that's finality.
Right. And
it's good.
We get to rest in that. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue talking about the book of Psalms.